She stood in the dark alley, armed with nothing but a dull knife. She was shielding a terrified child from monsters, unaware he was the vampire king's nephew. When the boy's uncle arrived, the deadliest executioner in the city, he didn't kill her. He looked at the broke waitress who dared to save his blood, turned to the assassins, and said the words that changed her fate forever: "She is under my protection." She never intended to become the shield for a monster's heir. She only meant to take out the trash. When a woman with empty pockets and a hollow stomach stands between a trembling child and the darkness that hunts him, she does not calculate the odds of survival. She simply acts, driven by the ancient, inexplicable instinct to protect what is small and broken. But as she stood in that alley, shivering in her grease-stained apron, she did not know that the boy clutching her leg was the only living nephew of the Vampire King. She did not know that saving him would not only paint a target on her back, but would force the most dangerous predator in the city to look at her with something other than hunger. The rain in the city of Oakhaven didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. Alara pushed open the heavy steel back door of Sal's all-night diner, the hinges screaming in protest against the rust. The air out here was heavy, smelling of wet asphalt, rotting vegetable peels, and the metallic tang of ozone. It was 3 a.m., the hour when the city held its breath, waiting for the sun or the devil, whichever came first. Her arms ached from carrying 3 trays of heavy crockery, and her feet throbbed in shoes that had lost their soles 2 months ago. She heaved the black garbage bag into the dumpster, the plastic tearing slightly on a jagged metal edge. She turned to go back inside, back to the warmth of the grill and the smell of burnt coffee, but a sound stopped her. It was faint, barely a scratch against the silence, like a dry leaf skittering across pavement. Alara paused, her hand on the door handle. Survival in this part of the city required a specific kind of deafness, the ability to ignore the pleas, the fights, the sirens. But this sound was different. It was a whimper, stifled and wet. Against her better judgment, Alara let the door close but didn't latch it. She moved deeper into the alley, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Shadows stretched like oil slicks between the brick walls. Behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets, something shifted. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound authoritative. "I don't have any money, so if you're looking to rob me, you're wasting your time." A small face peered out from the darkness. It was a boy no older than 7. He was impossibly pale, his skin glowing like bone china in the faint streetlight. He wore a suit, a tiny, tailored tuxedo that must have cost more than Alara made in a year, but the fabric was torn at the shoulder and mud caked the knees. His eyes were wide, dark, and terrified. "Please," the boy whispered. The word was a jagged shard of glass. "Don't let them take me." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was trouble. This was the kind of trouble that got people like her erased from existence. But then she saw his hands. They were shaking so violently that the knuckles were white, and on his left wrist, a bruise was blooming, a distinct, hand-shaped mark of violet and black. "Who?" Alara asked, crouching down, ignoring the dirty water soaking into her jeans. "Who is trying to take you?" The boy didn't answer. He looked past her, toward the mouth of the alley. Alara followed his gaze. 2 figures had appeared at the entrance, silhouetted against the street lamps. They were tall, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace that made the hair on Alara's arms stand up. They didn't walk, they drifted, silent as smoke. "Hide," Alara hissed, the command bypassing her brain entirely. She grabbed a heavy, rusted lid from a metal trash can and shoved the boy behind the pallets, throwing a tarp over the gap. She stood up just as the figures closed the distance. Up close, they were beautiful in a terrifying, synthetic way. Their skin was flawless, their eyes devoid of whites, entirely black. "We are looking for a stray," the one on the left said. His voice was like gravel grinding under a boot. "Small. Fragile. Expensive." Alara wiped her hands on her apron, trying to steady the tremor in her fingers. "I'm just taking out the trash," she said, her voice flat. "Only strays back here are the rats, and they aren't worth much." The figure stepped closer. The air around him dropped 10 degrees. Elara felt the chill seep into her marrow, ice in her veins. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell him, not sweat or cologne, but something sterile, like ozone and old blood. "Do not lie to us, cattle," he snarled. "I'm not lying," Elara said, holding his gaze. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Every instinct screamed predator, screamed run. "Check the dumpster if you want. But unless your stray eats coffee grounds, he's not here." The second figure sniffed the air. "The scent is stale. The rain washes it away." He went east, the first one decided, straightening up. He looked at Elara with profound disinterest, as if she were a piece of furniture. "If you see him, it would be in your best interest to forget you did." They vanished as quickly as they had appeared, dissolving into the shadows of the street. Elara waited a full minute, her breath trapped in her lungs, before she exhaled. Her legs felt like jelly. She turned back to the pallets and pulled the tarp away. The boy was curled into a tight ball, his hands over his ears. "They're gone," Elara whispered, reaching out to touch his shoulder. He flinched violently, his head snapping up. For a split second, Elara saw it. His eyes flashed a brilliant, luminescent crimson. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was biological. Supernatural. She recoiled, stumbling back. "What are you?" The boy's eyes faded back to a deep, human brown, filling with tears. "I'm hungry," he sobbed. "I'm so hungry." Elara looked at the terrified child, then at the empty alley where the monsters had been. She knew the stories. Everyone knew the stories. The vampires ruled the upper echelons of the city, the Sanguine Council dictating policy from their glass towers while humans scrounged below. This boy was one of them. But he was shivering. "Come on," Elara said, offering her hand. "I have leftover pie." Elara's apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in a building that should have been condemned during the last administration. The wallpaper peeled in long, sunburned strips, and the radiator hissed like an angry cat but produced no heat. It was small, but it was hers. She locked the door, engaging all 3 deadbolts. The boy, who said his name was Leo, sat on her lumpy beige sofa, looking absurdly out of place in his ruined tuxedo. He stared at the cracked ceiling as if it were a fascinating mural. "Here," Elara said, placing a bowl of tomato soup and a slice of bread on the coffee table. "It's not much, but it's warm." Leo looked at the food, then at her. He didn't move. Can you eat human food?" Elara asked, the question feeling ridiculous on her tongue. Leo nodded slowly. "I can. But it doesn't stop the hurting." He rubbed his stomach. "Uncle says I have to learn to wait." "Your uncle sounds like a charmer," Elara muttered, sitting on the floor across from him. "Why were those men chasing you?" "They aren't Uncle's men," Leo whispered, picking up the bread with trembling fingers. "They're the bad ones. They want to use me to make Uncle stop." "Stop what?" "Stop the peace." Elara frowned. The peace was the fragile treaty that kept humans from being harvested like livestock. If someone was trying to break that. "Eat the soup, Leo," she said softly. He ate with a desperate, clumsy hunger, ignoring the spoon and dipping the bread, getting tomato stains on his chin. Elara watched him, a strange ache in her chest. She had spent the last 5 years making herself invisible, keeping her head down, surviving the grief of losing her parents to a random mugging that the police never investigated. She had built walls around her life so thick nothing could get in. Now a vampire child was eating soup on her couch, and she felt the mortar of those walls crumbling. She went to the bathroom to wet a washcloth. When she returned, Leo was asleep. He had slumped over onto the cushions, looking impossibly small. Elara gently wiped his face, cleaning away the grime and soup. He didn't stir. She sat in the armchair opposite him, clutching a kitchen knife she had pulled from the drawer. It was dull, the handle taped together, but it was the only weapon she had. She watched the door. She watched the window. Hours passed. The city outside woke up, the sounds of traffic and shouting filtering through the thin glass. The sun began to bleed gray light through the curtains. Then, the air in the room changed. It didn't get cold, it went still. The dust motes stopped dancing in the shafts of light. The constant hum of the refrigerator cut out. Silence, heavy and absolute, descended like a shroud. The lock on her front door didn't break. It simply clicked open. The deadbolts slid back one by one, click, 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 moved by an invisible hand. Alara stood up, the knife shaking in her grip. She moved between the door and the sleeping boy. The door opened. The man who filled the frame was not like the thugs in the alley. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. His hair was black, swept back from a face that was carved from marble and indifference. He was beautiful in the way a thunderstorm or a loaded gun is beautiful. But it was his eyes that froze Alara in place. They were the color of amber, burning with a cold, ancient intelligence. Lord Julian Vane. Even Alara, who ignored the news, knew the face of the king's brother, the high executioner of the Sanguine Council. He stepped into the apartment. The floorboards didn't creak under his weight. He looked around the shabby room with an expression of mild curiosity, his gaze landing on the peeling wallpaper, the soup bowl, and finally, Alara. He looked at the knife in her hand. A corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, but an acknowledgement of absurdity. "You intend to kill me with cutlery?" His voice was a low baritone, smooth as velvet wrapped around steel. "If you touch him, I'll try," Alara said. Her voice sounded thin, pathetic in the face of his power. But she didn't lower the arm. Julian Vane tilted his head. He took a step forward. Alara lunged, slashing the air. It was a clumsy, desperate strike. He caught her wrist. He didn't grab it, he simply plucked it from the air. His skin was cool, hard as stone. He applied no pressure, yet she couldn't move her arm a millimeter. He looked down at her, his amber eyes dissecting her soul. "You are terrified," he observed, sounding bored. "Your heart is beating at 140 beats per minute. You smell of stale grease and fear. Yet you stand between a predator and his prey." "He's not prey," Alara spat, struggling against his grip. "He's a child." "He is a pureblood," Julian corrected. "And he is mine. Uncle." The shout came from the sofa. Leo scrambled up, his eyes wide. He didn't run away, he ran to the man. He slammed into Julian's legs, burying his face in the expensive wool of the man's trousers. Julian froze. For a second, the mask of indifference slipped, revealing a flash of something chaotic: relief? Pain? He released Alara's wrist instantly, his hand dropping to rest on the boy's head. It was a tentative gesture, awkward, as if he wasn't sure how to touch something without breaking it. "Leonardo," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming softer. "You are uninjured?" "She saved me," Leo muffled into the coat. "The bad ones found me in the alley. She hid me. She gave me soup." Julian looked up, his gaze meeting Alara's again. The dynamic in the room shifted. The threat didn't vanish, but it changed texture. He was no longer looking at an obstacle, he was looking at a curiosity. "You hid a vampire prince from the scourge," Julian said slowly. "Do you have any idea what they would have done to you if they found him in your care?" "I didn't care who he was," Alara said, rubbing her wrist where he had held her. "He was scared." Julian stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. He seemed to be reading the truth of her words in the flush of her skin, the dilation of her pupils. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alara. Alara Vance." "Alara Vance," he repeated, testing the syllables. "You have done the House of Vane a great service. You will be compensated." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy clip of cash. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It was more money than Alara had seen in her life. "Buy yourself a better lock. And perhaps a sharper knife." He looked down at Leo. "Come. We are leaving." Leo pulled back, shaking his head frantically. "No. I can't go back there. They're inside, Uncle. The bad ones are inside the house." Julian's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" "I heard them," Leo cried, tears returning. "Before I ran. They were talking to the guards. They said the king was too weak. They said tonight was the night." Julian went very still. The temperature in the room plummeted again. "Treason," he whispered. The word hung in the air like smoke. If Leo was telling the truth, the citadel wasn't safe. The stronghold of the vampires had been compromised. Julian looked at the boy, then at the door, calculating. He couldn't take Leo back to the nest if the vipers were waiting. He needed a safe house. He needed a place no one would look. His eyes drifted back to Alara. "Keep the money," Julian said, his voice clipping with urgency. "Pack a bag." Alara blinked. "Excuse me. The Citadel is compromised. If I take him back, he dies. If I leave him here alone, they will track his scent and he dies, and you die with him for harboring him." Julian stepped closer, his height overwhelming her. "You have already involved yourself, Miss Vance. There is no stepping back now." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Alara said, backing up until she hit the wall. "You have no choice," Julian said, not unkindly, but with the absolute certainty of a tidal wave. "The creatures who hunted him last night? They will return to this alley to track the scent they lost. They will find this apartment. They will find your scent on him." He leaned in, his hand resting on the wall beside her head. "You are already a target, Alara. The only question is whether you want to be a live target under my protection, or a dead one left in this slum." Alara looked at Leo. The boy was watching her, his eyes pleading. He looked so small, so terrified. If she said no, Julian might take him and run, but Leo clearly didn't feel safe with him. Or worse, Julian might leave him here as bait. She looked around her apartment. The peeling paint. The empty fridge. The life of quiet desperation she had built. It was a miserable life, but it was safe. Or it had been. "I need 5 minutes," she said, her voice trembling. Julian checked a watch that cost more than the entire building. "You have 3. The car was waiting 2 blocks away, idling in a darker shadow than the rest of the street. It was a long, matte black sedan with windows tinted so dark they looked like obsidian slabs. Alara sat in the back, squeezed between Leo and the door. Julian sat opposite them in the rear-facing seat, his long legs crossed. The interior smelled of leather and that same ozone blood scent that clung to him. As the car pulled away, gliding silently over the potholes, Alara watched her neighborhood disappear. The diner, the laundromat, the corner store, all fading into the gray morning mist. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My private estate," Julian replied without looking at her. He was typing on a sleek, transparent phone. "It is off the grid. Unconnected to the council's network." "And what am I supposed to do there?" Julian finally looked up. "You are the only human Leo has not attempted to bite or flee from in the last 24 hours. You are his anchor. Until I can purge the traitors from my brother's court, you will be his guardian." "I'm a waitress," Alara said, clutching her battered duffel bag. "I don't know how to take care of a vampire kid." "You fed him," Julian said, his eyes drifting to the bruise on Leo's arm, then to Alara's hands. "And you stood in front of him. That is more than his own guard did." A heavy silence fell. Leo had fallen asleep against Alara's shoulder, his cold hand gripping the fabric of her jeans. "He drinks." Alara trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Synthetic blood," Julian said. "Mostly. But he is young. The hunger makes him erratic." "Is he going to hurt me?" Julian looked at her. For the first time, the amber in his eyes softened, just a fraction. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was a lessening of the chill. "I will not allow it," he said. "It was a vow. You are under the protection of House Vane now, Alara. Nothing touches you unless it goes through me." Alara looked out the window. The city was giving way to the winding roads of the cliffs that overlooked the ocean. The houses here were fortresses of glass and stone. She had asked for protection. She had asked for a way out of the grind. But as the car passed through massive iron gates adorned with gargoyles, Alara realized the terrifying truth of her situation. She had traded the dangers of poverty for the dangers of power. The car stopped in front of a sprawling Gothic mansion that looked like it had been ripped from a Victorian nightmare and dropped onto the cliffside. Gargoyles perched on the eaves, staring down with stone eyes. The driver opened the door. Julian stepped out, then turned and extended a hand to Alara. She looked at his hand, pale, elegant, deadly. She looked at the ring on his finger, a heavy gold band with a ruby that caught the weak sunlight. "Come," he said. "Welcome to the Shadow Court." Alara took his hand. His grip was firm, his skin cool. A jolt of electricity, strange and sharp, zipped up her arm. Julian's eyes widened slightly, as if he felt it too, but he masked it instantly. She stepped out of the car, pulling Leo with her. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She stood before the massive doors of the estate, a broke waitress in worn-out sneakers, holding the hand of a monster. The heavy oak doors of Blackwood Manor groaned open, revealing a foyer that felt less like a home and more like the throat of a cavern. The air inside was still and seasoned with the scent of beeswax, old paper, and the faint, metallic tang of magic that Alara was beginning to associate with Julian. Alara stepped over the threshold, her sneakers squeaking against black marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Above, a chandelier dripping with crystals like frozen tears cast a fractured, spectral light over the grand staircase. The silence was absolute, a physical weight that pressed against her eardrums. "Silas," Julian said. He didn't raise his voice, yet the name carried through the vast space like a bell toll. From the shadows beneath the staircase, a figure materialized. He was an older man, human by the look of his weathering skin, dressed in a severe black suit. His posture was rigid, his eyes sharp and gray, scanning Alara and the boy with the precision of a security scanner. "My lord," Silas bowed, the movement crisp. "We were not expecting you until the equinox." "Plans change when treason is whispered in the nursery," Julian said, stripping off his coat. He moved with a restless energy now, the languid grace of the predator replaced by the pacing of a caged tiger. "Secure the perimeter. Level 4 lockdown. No signals in or out. If a bird flies over the fence, I want to know its flight path." Silas's eyes widened imperceptibly, shifting to the boy clinging to Alara's hand. "Master Leonardo, we were told you were detained." "I was hiding," Leo mumbled, pressing his face into Alara's side. "This is Alara Vance," Julian continued, tossing his coat to the older man. "She is a guest. She is under my personal protection. Place her in the blue suite, adjoining the nursery." Silas looked at Alara. His gaze lingered on her grease-stained apron, the fraying hem of her jeans, the cheap duffel bag. There was no judgment, only a cold calculation of her value. "Very good, my lord." "And the staff?" "Dismissed. All of them. Tonight, only you remain. And dinner. Ms. Vance requires sustenance." "I require silence." Julian turned to Alara. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a warning. Instead, the mask of the High Executioner slid back into place. "Silas will see to your needs. Do not leave the house. Do not open the windows. I have work to do." He turned on his heel and vanished down a dark corridor, the shadows seeming to reach out and welcome him home. The blue suite was larger than the entire diner Alara worked at. It was a room of suffocating luxury, heavy velvet drapes the color of midnight, a four-poster bed carved from dark mahogany, and a fireplace where a fire had already crackled to life, triggered by their arrival. Alara stood in the center of the room, her duffel bag looking like a dirty bandage on the pristine Persian rug. She felt like an imposter, a glitch in the matrix of this gothic fairy tale. "The bathroom is through there," Silas said, pointing to a door. "You will find fresh linens. I will bring clothing more appropriate for your stay." "I don't have money to pay for this," Alara said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "The clothes, the room." "I'm broke, Silas." Silas paused at the door. A ghost of a smile touched his thin lips. "Lord Vane does not require payment, Miss Vance. He requires loyalty. And considering you are the only reason his nephew is not currently being auctioned off to the highest bidder in the underground, I believe your tab is settled." He closed the door, leaving her alone. Alara sank onto the edge of the bed. The mattress absorbed her weight like a cloud. She looked at her hands, red, chapped, shaking. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. She was in a vampire's castle. She was the target of a coup. And she had left her phone charger in the apartment. A small knock came at the connecting door. "Alara." She opened it to find Leo standing there. He had been cleaned up, his face scrubbed of grime, wearing striped silk pajamas that looked comically formal. "I can't sleep," he whispered. "The shadows are too long here." Alara's heart softened. Come here. She sat him on her bed. Do you want me to read to you? I don't see any books, but I know The Princess Bride by heart. Leo shook his head. Can you just sit? Uncle Julian is scary when he's working. The house feels angry. The house is just a house, Leo. No, the boy said seriously, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Uncle's magic is in the stones. When he is angry, the walls get cold. When he is sad, it rains inside the conservatory. Right now, the house is holding its breath. Alara looked around the room. The fire flickered, casting dancing shapes on the walls. She realized then that she wasn't just in a building, she was inside the ribcage of a beast, and Julian Vane was its heart. Okay, Alara said, pulling the duvet up. I'll stay right here. I won't let the shadows get you. Leo curled up, grabbing a handful of her shirt. You smell like French fries, he murmured sleepily. It's nice. 2 hours later, Leo was deeply asleep. Alara, however, was wide awake. Her mind was racing, replaying the image of the men in the alley, the black eyes, the way Julian had caught her wrist. She needed water. She slipped out of the room, moving quietly into the hallway. The house was a labyrinth of shadows. She found the grand staircase and descended, guided by a faint light spilling from a room on the ground floor. It was the library. The door was ajar. Inside, the walls were lined floor to ceiling with books. In the center of the room, behind a massive desk cluttered with maps and ancient scrolls, sat Julian. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they were carved from marble. He wasn't reading. He was staring at a map of the city spread out before him, marking locations with a red grease pencil. A glass of dark, viscous liquid sat untouched near his hand. Alara meant to back away, but a floorboard betrayed her, groaning under her weight. Julian didn't look up. Insomnia is a common side effect of trauma. Or is the bed unsatisfactory? The bed is worth more than my life, Alara said, stepping into the room. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly conscious of the oversized sweater Silas had provided. I just wanted water. Sideboard. Crystal pitcher. Alara poured a glass. The water was ice cold. She drank it, watching him. What are you doing? Hunting, Julian said. He finally looked up. His eyes were tired, the amber dulled to a burnished gold. I am trying to determine how the scourge knew Leo's location. Only 3 people knew his schedule. His father, myself, and his nanny. The nanny, dead, found her in the nursery. Throat torn out. Julian said it with zero emotion, stating a fact like the weather. Which leaves the king or myself. And since I have no desire to murder my own blood, and my brother is currently in a magically induced coma, we have a leak in the inner circle. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty house. A coma. The king is ill. That is why the vultures are circling. They sense weakness. Julian stood up, picking up the glass of dark liquid. He swirled it, but didn't drink. They want to break the peace. They believe humans are cattle, Alara. They believe we should return to the old ways. Hunting openly. Ruling through fear. And you don't. Julian walked around the desk, leaning against the front of it, crossing his ankles. He studied her. I am the executioner, Alara. I have killed more of my kind than any hunter in history. I do it to maintain order. To keep the balance. Because I know that if we go to war with humanity, we might win the first battle, but we will lose the war. There are 7 billion of you. There are fewer than 10,000 of us. He took a sip of the drink. I am a pragmatist. Not a monster. You caught my hand, Alara said softly. In the apartment. You moved faster than I could see. I am 642 years old, Julian said. I have had time to practice. Does it hurt? Does what hurt? Being what you are. Leo said he was hungry, and it hurt. Julian's expression tightened. He set the glass down with a sharp clack. The hunger is a constant companion. Imagine you have not eaten for a week. Imagine your throat is parched, your stomach cramping. Now imagine that the only thing that can satisfy that need is walking around you, talking to you, smelling of life and warmth. Alara took a step back, her heart stuttering. Do not fear, Julian said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. I have exceptional control. And you are not on the menu. Why? Alara asked, her curiosity overriding her survival instinct. Why am I different? Julian pushed off the desk and walked toward her. He stopped 2 feet away. The air between them crackled. He looked down at her, his gaze tracing the line of her jaw, the pulse fluttering in her neck. Because you surprised me, he said. In 6 centuries, very few things surprise me. You stood before a monster with a butter knife. That kind of courage is rare. It is intoxicating. He reached out. For a second, Alara thought he was going to touch her throat. Instead, he reached past her and closed the library door she had left open. Go to bed, Alara, he said, his voice strained. Lock your door. Do not open it for anyone but Silas or myself. Julian, she said. It was the first time she had used his name without a title. He paused. Thank you for saving us. I haven't saved us yet, he murmured, turning back to his maps. I have only bought us time. The next morning, the estate was transformed. The gloom of the night had lifted, replaced by a crisp, bright sunlight that flooded through the high windows. It didn't make the gargoyles look any friendlier, but it made the space feel less like a tomb. Alara found the kitchen by following the smell of bacon. It was a massive, industrial space with copper pots hanging from the ceiling and a walk-in fridge the size of a bedroom. Silas was at the stove, flipping pancakes with military precision. Leo was sitting at a butcher block island, swinging his legs, drinking a juice box that looked strangely opaque. Good morning, Alara said. Morning, Leo chirped. The fear from the previous night seemed to have evaporated with the sun. Silas makes pancakes shaped like bats. Appropriate, Alara muttered, taking a seat next to him. Coffee? Silas asked, sliding a mug across the island. It was perfect, black, strong, hot. You're a miracle worker, Alara said after the first sip. I aim to please. Silas set a plate of pancakes in front of her. Lord Vane has requested your presence in the training yard after breakfast. He believes it is time to discuss your role in the coming days. Alara choked on her coffee. Training yard? Does he think I'm going to fight? He thinks you need to survive, Silas said gravely. And currently, your primary defense mechanism is sarcasm. While charming, it is ineffective against a feral vampire. Alara finished her breakfast in silence. The reality of her situation was settling in like a heavy coat. She wasn't a guest, she was a refugee. And refugees had to learn to run or fight. She found Julian in a walled courtyard behind the house. The ground was covered in crushed white gravel. High stone walls blocked the wind, creating a sun trap. Julian was stripped to his waist. Alara stopped in the archway, her breath catching. His back was a landscape of muscle and scars. Pale, silvery lines crisscrossed his skin, claw marks, burn scars, history written in violence. He was moving through a series of forms, a sword in his hand. The blade was black metal, absorbing the light. He moved with a fluidity that was mesmerizing, the sword an extension of his arm. He sensed her. He didn't turn around, but he stopped mid-swing, the blade humming in the air. You're staring, he said. You're shirtless, Alara retorted, walking onto the gravel. It's hard not to. Julian turned. His chest was heaving slightly, a sheen of sweat on his skin making him glisten. He didn't seem embarrassed. He seemed entirely comfortable in his skin, however scarred it was. Grab a weapon, he said, nodding to a rack of wooden practice swords against the wall. I'm not fighting you with a stick, Julian. No, he said, walking toward her. You are not fighting me. You couldn't fight me. You are learning how to create distance. How to escape. He tossed the black metal sword to the side. It vanished into thin air before it hit the ground and picked up a wooden staff. The creatures searching for Leo are called trackers, Julian explained, circling her. They're fast. Faster than me. But they're stupid. They rely on instinct. If you run, they chase. If you scream, they attack. So what do? You freeze, Julian said. And then you strike the eyes or the throat. Those are the only soft points on a tracker. He lunged. It wasn't a real attack, moving at a fraction of his speed, but it was terrifying. Alara flinched, throwing her arms up. The staff tapped her ribs. Not hard, but enough to sting. Dead, Julian said. Again. He lunged again. Alara scrambled back, slipping on the gravel. Dead, he said. Again. For an hour, he was relentless. He didn't coddle her. He knocked her down. He bruised her shins. He pushed her until her lungs burned and her hair was plastered to her face. I hate you, Alara wheezed, hands on her knees, gasping for air. Good, Julian said. He wasn't even out of breath. Hate is a fuel. Fear is a paralysis. I can work with hate. He tossed her a bottle of water. She caught it, surprising herself. You have good reflexes, Julian noted. Waitress reflexes. You are used to dodging spilling trays and grabbing falling glasses. We can use that. Great, Alara said, uncapping the water. I'll bust the vampires to death. Julian cracked a smile. It was a genuine one this time, showing a hint of white teeth. It transformed his face, taking 10 years off his age. Silas tells me the security grid has picked up a signal, he said, the smile fading as quickly as it appeared. A car. Approaching the main gate. Alara stiffened. Them. No, Julian said, his eyes darkening. Worse. The council. The arrival of the council delegation was an exercise in intimidation. A convoy of 3 silver limousines rolled up the driveway, flanked by motorcycle outriders clad in black leather armor. Julian stood on the front steps of the manor, now fully dressed in a suit that cost more than a car, a heavy velvet cloak draped over his shoulders. He looked every inch the High Lord. Alara stood behind him, partially hidden by the doorframe, with Leo clutching her hand. The lead car stopped. The driver opened the door and a woman stepped out. She was stunning. Tall, with hair like spun gold and skin that looked like it had been dusted with diamond powder. She wore a white suit that was blinding in the sun. Lady Vane, Julian said, his voice dripping with ice. Julian, the woman replied, her voice like a flute. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking on the stone. She stopped 3 steps below him, looking up with a mixture of affection and condescension. You look tired, darling. The country air doesn't suit you. What do you want, Serafina? I want my nephew, she said, her gaze snapping past Julian to lock onto Leo. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a predator's smile. The council is worried. You vanished with the boy. People are talking. They say you've gone rogue. Kidnapped the heir. I am protecting the heir, Julian corrected. From the very people you arrived with. Serafina laughed, a tinkling, hollow sound. Paranoia, Julian. It always was your flaw. Give me the boy. I will take him to the Crystal Tower. He will be safe there. He stays with me. Serafina's eyes narrowed. She took a step up. The guards behind her shifted, hands moving to holsters. You are defying a direct order from the regent, she hissed. I take orders from the king, Julian said, his voice booming now, resonating with power. And until the king wakes, I am the law in this family. Serafina looked at Julian, measuring him. Then her eyes drifted to Alara. And who is this? She asked, sniffing the air delicately. A pet? She smells common. She is none of your concern, Julian said, stepping sideways to block her view of Alara. She smells like you, Serafina noted, a wicked gleam entering her eyes. Oh, Julian. How quaint. You found a warm blood to play house with. Does she know what you did to the last one? Alara felt a cold not form in her stomach. Julian stiffened, his shoulders tensing under the cloak. Leave, Julian said. The command was laced with power, a kinetic force that actually pushed the air outward. The gravel on the driveway rattled. Get off my land, Serafina. Before I forget that you are my sister-in-law. Serafina held his gaze for a long, tense moment. Then she smiled, shrugging. Very well. But you can't hide him forever, Julian. The equinox ball is in 3 days. The heir must be presented to the court. If he is not there, we will assume he is dead. And we will crown a new king. She turned and walked back to the car. See you at the ball, darling. Bring your pet. She might make a nice appetizer. The convoy reversed and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in the air. Julian stood like a statue until they were out of sight. Then he sagged, letting out a long, ragged breath. What did she mean? Alara asked, stepping out onto the porch. What did she mean about the last one? Julian turned to her. His face was bleak, the amber eyes haunted. Pack your bags, Alara, he said, ignoring the question. We are going to a ball. A ball? You just said it was a trap. It is, Julian said, turning back to the heavy doors. But it is the only place where I can look my enemies in the eye and see which one blinks first. And you are coming with me. Why? Because, Julian said, looking back at her, if I leave you here, Serafina will send a kill squad within the hour. The safest place for you now is in the middle of the snake pit, right by my side. The hours leading up to the Equinox Ball were not spent in idle preparation, but in a grim, tactical frenzy that felt more like gearing up for a siege than a party. The estate went into full lockdown. Silas moved through the corridors like a phantom, securing windows and double-checking wards, while Julian spent hours in his study, speaking in hushed, rapid-fire tongues into a secure line. Alara sat in the blue suite, staring at the garment bag hanging on the wardrobe door. Silas had brought it in an hour ago, handling it with white cotton gloves. She hadn't asked about the last one. The question sat in her throat like a stone, heavy and sharp. She knew if she asked, Julian would shut down. He was a vault, and Serafina had merely scratched the paint. The door to the suite opened. Julian entered. He was already dressed in formal wear, a tuxedo of midnight blue velvet, the cut severe and modern, contrasting with the ancient, dangerous aura he projected. He held a small velvet box in his hand. You aren't dressed, he observed, closing the door. I don't know how to be what you need me to be, Alara said, standing up. She felt small in her oversized sweater. I'm a waitress, Julian. I serve coffee. I don't walk into snake pits with royalty. You are not going as a waitress, Julian said, walking to the wardrobe. He unzipped the bag. And you are not going as a guest. He pulled the dress out. It was breathtaking, a cascade of gunmetal gray silk that looked like liquid mercury. It was simple, elegant, and clearly constructed by hands that knew more about magic than sewing. Then what am I? You are the distraction, Julian said, turning to face her. The court expects me to be alone. They expect me to be the grieving, isolated executioner. If I walk in with a human on my arm, a human I have placed under my protection, they will be confused. Confusion breeds hesitation. And hesitation gives me the opening I need to find the traitor. So I'm bait, Alara said flatly. No, Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping. Bait is meant to be eaten. You are the shield. The silk? It is woven with Kevlar and protective wards. The necklace. He opened the velvet box to reveal a choker of black diamonds. It contains a tracking beacon linked to my own heartbeat. If your pulse jumps above 150, or if you are moved more than 50 feet from me, I will know. He held the necklace out. Alara turned, lifting her hair. His hands brushed the nape of her neck. His skin was cool, but where he touched her, Alara felt a phantom heat, a friction that sent a shiver down her spine. He clasped the diamonds. They felt heavy, cold against her throat. About what Serafina said, Alara whispered, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Julian stood behind her, a dark tower of protection. The last one. Julian's hands paused on her shoulders. For a moment, the silence in the room was deafening. Her name was Elena, Julian said, his eyes meeting Alara's in the glass. She was spirited. Like you. I made the mistake of thinking I could keep her separate from my world. I thought I could live two lives. What happened? I was wrong, Julian said. The grief in his voice was ancient, a canyon carved by centuries of river water. My enemies found her. They used her to get to me. I was too slow. His grip on her shoulders tightened, just for a fraction of a second, before he released her and stepped back. I will not make that mistake again. You are not hidden, Alara. You are right beside me. Where I can see you. Where I can kill anyone who looks at you with hunger. He turned to the door. Get dressed. We leave in 20 minutes. The journey to the Crystal Tower took them into the heart of the city, but not the city Alara knew. The car turned down a street that shouldn't have existed, passing through a shimmering barrier that rippled like oil on water. Suddenly, the skyline changed. The mundane skyscrapers of the financial district were dwarfed by impossible architecture, spires of obsidian and glass that twisted into the clouds, connected by bridges of light. The air here vibrated with a low hum, a frequency that made Alara's teeth ache. "Welcome to the Undercity," Julian said from the darkness of the back seat. Leo was sandwiched between them, wearing a miniature version of Julian's tuxedo. He was pale, clutching a stuffed bat Silas had given him. "Are the bad ones there?" Leo asked, his voice tiny. "Some of them," Julian said honestly. "But we are not going in through the back door this time, Leo. We are walking in through the front. And you will keep your head up. You are a vain. You do not show fear to the cattle." Leo straightened his spine, mimicking Julian's posture. It was heartbreakingly cute and terrifying all at once. The car pulled up to the base of the crystal tower. A red carpet, crimson, naturally stretched up the stairs. Paparazzi were screaming, flashes exploding like strobe lights. But these weren't human photographers, they were minor fae, goblins with cameras, lower caste vampires hungry for a glimpse of power. "Stay close," Julian murmured to Alara as the door opened. "Do not speak unless spoken to. And if you feel danger, squeeze my hand." He stepped out first. A hush fell over the crowd. The High Executioner had arrived. He reached back and helped Alara out. The silence broke into a roar of whispers. "A human? With Lord Vane? Unclaimed? No mark?" Alara kept her chin high, channeling every ounce of stubbornness she possessed. She took Julian's arm. The muscle beneath the velvet was rock hard. He pulled her flush against his side, a possessive, undeniable gesture. They ascended the stairs, Leo walking a step ahead of them, flanked by 4 of Julian's personal guards who had materialized from the shadows. Inside, the ballroom was a cavern of excess. The ceiling was a holographic projection of the night sky, complete with shooting stars. The floor was black glass. Hundreds of beings, vampires, hyphae, warlocks, swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels. The smell was overwhelming, expensive perfume, ozone, and the metallic copper tang of blood wine. "Don't look at the food," Julian warned in her ear as they passed a buffet table. "And don't drink anything unless Silas hands it to you." They moved to a private balcony overlooking the dance floor. Silas was already there, standing guard. "Secure?" Julian asked. "The perimeter is held by our own," Silas confirmed. "Master Leo will remain here with me. The glass is bulletproof and spellwoven." Julian knelt before Leo. "You stay with Silas. You watch the room. If you see the men from the alley, you tell Silas. Do you understand?" Leo nodded solemnly. "I will be the lookout." Julian stood and turned to Alara. "Now," he said, offering his hand. "We dance." "I don't know how to waltz," Alara panicked. "I do," Julian said. "Just follow my lead. And try not to look like you want to stab everyone." "I make no promises." The moment they stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd parted. It was like the Red Sea splitting, a wave of colorful silk retreating to give them space. The orchestra, a string quartet of skeletons playing cellos, segued seamlessly into a haunting, slow waltz. Julian pulled her in. His hand settled on the small of her back, burning through the silk of her dress. He moved with a grace that made Alara feel weightless. She didn't need to know the steps. He simply guided her, his body signaling the turns before they happened. "They are staring," Alara whispered, looking at the ring of faces watching them. "Let them stare," Julian said, his eyes locked on hers. "Let them wonder why the executioner brought a stray to the feast. Look at them, Alara. Tell me what you see." Alara forced herself to look away from his amber eyes and scan the crowd. She saw envy. She saw lust. But mostly, she saw fear. "They're afraid of you," she said. "Good. Fear keeps the peace." He spun her, a dizzying rotation that left her breathless. "Do you see the man in the red sash? By the pillar." Alara caught a glimpse of a heavy-set vampire holding a goblet. "Yes, Lord Blackwood. He runs the shipping docks. He is greedy but loyal to the coin. He is not our traitor." Julian guided her across the floor. "The woman in the emerald dress? Lady Voss. She hates my brother, but she hates anarchy more. She is safe." Who isn't safe? Him. Julian nodded subtly toward a corner. Leaning against a wall, looking bored, was a man who looked disturbingly like Julian, but with softer features and a cruel mouth. He was watching them with a smirk. Caspian, Julian murmured. My cousin. He has always believed he should be next in line, despite the blood laws. As if he heard his name, Caspian pushed off the wall and began to cut through the dancers toward them. Steady, Julian whispered. Smile. Caspian intercepted them just as the music swelled. Cousin, Caspian drawled, his voice like syrup. And who is this delightful morsel? I didn't know we were bringing snacks to the dance floor. Careful, Caspian, Julian said, his voice pleasant but his eyes deadly. You might choke. Alara, Julian introduced her. This is Caspian. He is irrelevant. Caspian's smile faltered. Irrelevant? That is harsh, Julian. Especially since I heard a rumor that the king took a turn for the worse this afternoon. Julian stopped dancing. The people around them faltered, sensing the shift in pressure. Is that so? Julian asked softly. Indeed. Organ failure. Tragic. Caspian looked at Alara, his eyes undressing her. It would be a shame if the executioner was distracted when the transition of power happens. If the king dies, Julian said, his voice carrying over the music, silencing the nearby couples, then the regency falls to me until Leo comes of age. And my first act as regent will be to purge the court of parasites. Caspian laughed, but it was nervous. Always the dramatic one. Enjoy the dance, cousin. The music won't last forever. He bowed mockingly to Alara and slipped away into the crowd. He knows something, Julian muttered, pulling Alara back into motion. He's too confident. They're going to move tonight. What do we do? Alara asked, her heart hammering against the tracking necklace. We escalate, Julian said. The music ended. Julian didn't let go of her hand. He led her off the floor, not toward the balcony, but toward the high table where the council sat, 3 ancient vampires who looked like wax figures. And Serafina. She sat in the center, radiant and terrible. When she saw Julian approaching with Alara, her eyes narrowed. Lord Vane, one of the elders rasped. You disturb the proceedings. I demand an audience, Julian said, his voice ringing through the hall. The music stopped completely. The entire ball turned to watch. This is a social gathering, Serafina said, sipping her wine. Not a court session. It is a crime scene, Julian declared. Gasps rippled through the room. I have evidence, Julian lied, or Alara assumed he was lying, that the poison used on the king was procured by a member of this council. The room exploded into chaos. Shouts, accusations, the drawing of weapons. Silence, the elder roared. He is delirious. Serafina stood up, pointing a manicured finger at Julian. He brings a human whore into our sacred hall and spews madness. Seize him. The royal guard, 6 vampires in heavy armor, stepped forward from the walls. Julian pushed Alara behind him. Silas, he shouted into his lapel mic, get the boy out. Plan B. Julian. Alara grabbed his arm. What are you doing? I'm drawing the fire, Julian said, slipping a long, silver dagger from his sleeve. Go to the balcony. Run. No. Go. Julian shoved her toward the stairs just as the first guard lunged. The ballroom descended into violence. It was a blur of motion too fast for human eyes to follow. Julian was a whirlwind of black velvet and silver steel. He parried a sword strike with his dagger, kicked a guard into a table of champagne flutes, and spun to decapitate a second attacker. Alara scrambled up the stairs, her heels slipping on the glass steps. She reached the balcony just as Silas slammed the door shut and engaged the magnetic locks. Where is he? Alara gasped, pressing her face to the glass. Below, Julian was fighting 5 men at once. He was magnificent and terrifying. But he was outnumbered. We must leave, Silas said, grabbing Leo. The extraction point is the roof. We can't leave him. Leo screamed, kicking at Silas. He bought us this path, Master Leo. Do not waste it. Suddenly, the glass wall of the balcony shattered. Not from the inside, but from the outside. Caspian dropped onto the balcony from the rafters, landing in a crouch. He held a wicked, curved blade. Two other vampires landed behind him. Silas drew a gun, a large caliber hand cannon etched with runes, and fired. The bullet took one vampire in the shoulder, spinning him around, but Caspian was too fast. He slapped the gun from Silas's hand and backhanded the butler into the wall. Silas crumpled, unconscious. Leo screamed. Caspian lunged for the boy. Alara didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just moved. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the side table and swung it with all her might. It connected with the side of Caspian's head with a sickening crunch. The crystal didn't break, but Caspian stumbled, stunned for a fraction of a second. "Run, Leo!" Alara shouted, placing herself between the vampire and the child. Caspian shook his head, blood trickling down his temple. He looked at Alara with genuine annoyance. "I am going to enjoy draining you," he snarled. He reached out, grabbing Alara by the throat. He lifted her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. Her feet kicked helplessly. The world began to swim, black spots dancing in her vision. The tracking necklace burned against her skin, pulsing frantically. "No one is coming," Caspian whispered, his fangs extending. "Julian is busy dying." Crack. The sound was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of stone breaking. Caspian froze. He looked down. A sword, a blade of pure, black metal, was protruding from his chest. He dropped Alara. She fell to the floor, gasping, clutching her throat. Behind Caspian stood Julian. He was disheveled, his tuxedo torn, bleeding from a cut on his cheek. But his eyes were burning with a rage that was hotter than the sun. "I told you," Julian whispered into Caspian's ear. "She is under my protection." He ripped the sword out. Caspian turned to ash before he hit the ground. The other vampire backed away, terrified, and jumped over the railing, fleeing into the chaos below. Julian dropped to his knees beside Alara. His hands, usually so cold, felt scorching hot on her skin as he checked her neck. "Alara," he choked out. "Alara, look at me." She blinked, her vision clearing. You were downstairs." "I heard your heart," he said. "The necklace. It spiked." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The High Executioner, the monster of the Vane family, was shaking. "I thought I was too slow," he whispered into her hair. "I thought I was too slow again." Alara wrapped her arms around him, feeling the frantic beat of his dead heart against her chest. "You weren't," she rasped. "You were right on time." "Uncle!" Leo cried, running to them. Julian opened one arm and pulled the boy into the embrace. For a moment, they huddled there on the shattered glass of the balcony, a waitress, a king, and a prince, while the battle raged below. "We have to go," Julian said, pulling back. His face hardened, the vulnerability locked away again. "Serafina has played her hand. The council is fractured. If we stay, we die. Where do we go?" Alara asked. "They know where the estate is." "We don't go to the estate," Julian said, standing up and helping her to her feet. "We go to the one place they won't look. The one place vampires never go." "Where?" "A church," Julian said grimly. "Specifically, the Cathedral of St. Jude. It sits on holy ground. It burns us to step foot on it. But it's the only sanctuary left." "It will burn you?" Alara asked, horrified. "Pain is irrelevant," Julian said, picking up Leo. "Survival is mandatory." He looked at Alara. "Are you ready to run?" Alara kicked off her high heels. She tore the slit in her dress higher to free her legs. She grabbed the dagger Caspian had dropped. "Lead the way," she said. The black sedan, stolen from the chaotic valet line of the Crystal Tower, tore through the rain-slicked streets of Oakhaven. Silas, having regained consciousness but nursing a broken arm, drove with one hand, his face a mask of grim determination. In the back, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Alara tore a strip from the hem of her ruined gown and pressed it against the cut on Julian's cheek. The wound, which should have healed seconds after it was made, was sluggish, the edges angry and red. "It's a cursed blade," Julian murmured, his eyes closed, head resting against the cool glass of the window. He looked exhausted, the immortality drained out of him, leaving something dangerously mortal behind. Caspian was always fond of cheating. "Hold still," Alara commanded softly. Her hands were steady now. The terror of the ballroom had calcified into a cold, hard resolve. She was done shivering. Leo was curled in the footwell, wrapped in Julian's torn velvet jacket, asleep. His resilience was a small mercy. "We are approaching the district, my lord," Silas announced from the front. "The cathedral is 3 blocks east." Julian opened his eyes. The amber was dim, like a dying ember. "Park at the rear." "The rectory entrance." "It hasn't been used since the 90s. "Will the wards hold?" Alara asked. "The wards are not the problem," Julian said, sitting up and wincing. "The church itself is the weapon. It is consecrated ground, Alara. For your kind, it is a place of peace. For us, it is like walking into a blast furnace." "Then why go there?" "Because Seraphina is many things," Julian said, a dark smile touching his lips, "but she is a coward. She will not cross the threshold of God's house, not even to claim a crown." The Cathedral of St. Jude was a gargoyle-studded mountain of stone rising from the slums of the lower city. It was abandoned by the diocese years ago, left to the rats and the pigeons, but the holiness remained, a stubborn, spiritual radiation that Alara couldn't feel, but Julian reacted to the moment the car crossed the property line. He hissed, his hand gripping the leather armrest so hard the material tore. "Out," he ordered, his voice tight. They spilled out into the alley behind the church. The rain was falling harder now, washing away the blood of the ballroom. Silas carried Leo, who whimpered in his sleep. Julian walked toward the heavy wooden door of the rectory. With every step, he grew paler. Steam began to rise from his shoulders where the rain hit his suit, not because of heat, but because the very air of the place was rejecting him. "Julian," Alara said, reaching for him. "Don't touch me," he gasped, pulling away. "My skin, it burns. If you touch me now, the feedback might hurt you." He reached the door. He didn't have a key. He placed his palm against the wood. Smoke curled from beneath his fingers. The smell of searing flesh filled the damp alley. He grit his teeth, a guttural growl vibrating in his chest, and pushed with a burst of telekinetic force. The lock shattered. The door swung open. Julian stumbled inside and immediately fell to his knees on the dusty floorboards. Alara rushed past him, scouting the room. It was an old vestry, filled with rotting cupboards and moth-eaten robes. It was cold, damp, and smelled of incense and mildew. "Silas, put Leo on that bench," Alara ordered, taking charge. "Then check the perimeter. If anyone comes within a block, I want to know." "Yes, Miss Vance," Silas said. He looked at his master, then at Alara. He nodded, a gesture of newfound respect, and disappeared back into the rain. Alara turned to Julian. He was on his hands and knees, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. The veins in his neck stood out, black against his pale skin. "What can I do?" she asked, dropping to her knees beside him, careful not to touch him yet. "Water," he rasped. "And distance. I need to acclimate." Alara scrambled. She found a rusted sink in the corner. Miraculously, the pipes groaned and spat out a stream of brown, then clear water. She found a chipped ceramic bowl and filled it. When she returned, Julian had managed to drag himself to a wall. He sat with his back against it, legs sprawled. He looked like a fallen angel, beautiful and ruined. She placed the bowl near him. "Drink." He lifted the bowl with shaking hands. As he drank, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. The steam stopped rising from his clothes. The consecrated ground was still hurting him. She could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes, but he wasn't actively cooking anymore. "Better," she whispered. "Manageable," he lied. He looked at her. His gaze traveled over her torn dress, her bare feet, the bruise forming on her neck where Caspian had grabbed her. "I failed you," he said. The words were heavy, dropping into the silence like stones. "You killed him," Alara said. "You saved me." "I let him touch you," Julian said, his voice laced with self-loathing. "I promised you protection. Instead, I dragged you into a war zone and brought you to a place that rejects my very existence." He closed his eyes. You should leave, Alara. The morning train out of the city. I can have Silas arrange it. You can disappear. Start over. Alara stared at him. She thought about the diner. The grease. The loneliness. The safety of being nobody. Then she looked at the man bleeding on the floor of an abandoned church because he refused to let a child die. She moved closer. Stop, he warned. I am dangerous right now. The pain makes the hunger sharp. I'm not afraid of you, Alara said. You should be. Well, I'm not. She reached out. This time, he didn't pull away. She placed her hand on his cheek, right over the cut from the cursed blade. His skin was fever-hot, contrasting with his usual chill. He froze, his breath hitching. He leaned into her touch, just a fraction, closing his eyes as if her palm offered the only peace in a world of agony. You didn't fail me, Julian, she said softly. You found me. For the first time in my life, someone actually saw me. Not as a waitress. Not as a victim. But as me. Julian's hand came up, wrapping around her wrist. His thumb traced the pulse point, feeling the steady rhythm of her life. You are extraordinary, he whispered. Do you know what I felt when Caspian held you? It was not anger. It was not duty. It was panic. Absolute, blinding panic. He opened his eyes. The amber was swirling, deep and molten. I have lived 600 years, Alara. I have buried wives. I have buried children. I thought my heart was a withered thing, capable only of pumping blood. But tonight I realized I was wrong. He leaned forward. Their foreheads touched. The air between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the magnetic pull of two lonely souls colliding. If we survive this, Julian murmured against her skin, I will spend the rest of my existence making sure you never have to wear a stained apron again. If we survive this, Alara countered, her voice trembling, I'm going to make you explain exactly what compensation means in vampire terms. He let out a short, breathy laugh. It was a beautiful sound. He tilted his head. His lips brushed hers tentative, restraining his own strength, terrified of breaking her. It was a kiss of desperation and promise, tasting of rain and iron. Alara kissed him back, pouring all her fear and adrenaline into the contact. For a moment, the church, the war, and the monsters didn't exist. There was only the heat of him and the anchor of his hand on her wrist. A polite cough from the doorway broke the spell. They pulled apart. Silas stood there, dripping wet, looking pointedly at the ceiling. I apologize for the interruption, my lord, Silas said dryly. But we have a problem. What is it? Julian asked, his voice instantly shifting back to command mode, though he didn't let go of Alara's hand. The news, Silas said, holding up a tablet. Lady Seraphina has been busy. Alara and Julian crowded around the small screen. It was a broadcast from the steps of the Crystal Tower. Seraphina stood before a sea of microphones, looking every inch the grieving widow, though her husband wasn't dead yet. Citizens of the night, she proclaimed, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. It is with a heavy heart that I announce the betrayal of Lord Julian Vane. Tonight, in a fit of madness, he attacked the royal court. He has kidnapped the heir, Leonardo Vane, and fled into the night. Gasps from the crowd. Furthermore, Seraphina continued, wiping a single, diamond-bright tear from her cheek, we have evidence that Julian Vane is responsible for the illness of our beloved king. He sought to seize the throne for himself. Therefore, the council has no choice but to declare him excommunicado. Julian stiffened. She didn't. A bounty of 50 million is placed on his head, Seraphina said, her eyes hard as flint. Alive or dead. And for the human accomplice, she is to be terminated on sight. The feed cut to black. Silence filled the vestry. Excommunicado, Julian whispered. It means the laws of the peace no longer apply to us. Any vampire, any creature, any hunter can kill us without consequence. We are open season. 50 million, Alara said, feeling sick. Every monster in the city will be hunting us. Not just the city, Silas added grimly. The contract goes global in an hour. Julian stood up. He winced as the holy ground burned his feet, but he ignored it. He paced the small room, his mind working furiously. "We cannot stay here," he said. "St. Jude's hides us from magic, but it doesn't hide us from eyes. Someone will see the car. Someone will talk." "We can't run," Alara said. "You said it yourself. You're weak here. And out there? You're outnumbered 10,000 to 1. "Then we fight," Julian said, turning to the window. "We go back to the Citadel. We wake the king." "That's suicide," Silas said. "The Citadel is a fortress. Serafina will have the royal guard doubled." "We don't need to fight the guard," Alara said slowly. An idea was forming in her mind, a reckless, insane idea. "We just need to get past them." Julian looked at her. "Alara, you are brave, but you cannot sneak 3 people past the elite security of the vampire nation." "I don't want to sneak," Alara said. She walked over to the pile of moth-eaten robes in the corner. She picked up a heavy, hooded habit. "Serafina controls the narrative because she controls the cameras. She told everyone you're a traitor. She told everyone the king is dying." She turned to face them. "But she's lying, and lies only work in the dark." "What are you suggesting?" "The equinox," Alara said. "It's tomorrow night, right? The ceremony where the heir is supposed to be presented." "Yes," Julian nodded. "At the Grand Plaza. It is a public event, televised to the entire Undercity." "Perfect," Alara said. A waitress's smile, the one she used when a customer was being difficult and she was about to handle it, spread across her face. "Serafina expects you to run. She expects you to hide. She doesn't expect you to walk right up to the microphone." "If I step onto the plaza, I will be shot by a dozen snipers," Julian pointed out. "Not if they don't know it's you," Alara said. "Silas, can you drive a truck?" "I can fly a helicopter if required, Miss Vance," Silas replied. "Good. And Julian, how good are you at acting?" "I have spent 6 centuries in a court of liars," Julian said, intrigued. "I am a virtuoso." "Great," Alara said. "Because we're not going to break into the Citadel. We're going to be the catering delivery." The next 12 hours were a blur of improvisation and theft. Silas acquired a delivery van from a bakery that serviced the Undercity. Alara used the cash Julian had given her back at the apartment, it felt like a lifetime ago, to buy supplies from a 24-hour hardware store: duct tape, mirrors, bleach, and 3 janitorial uniforms. They spent the day in the church. Julian slept fitfully, his body fighting the holy ground's pressure to heal his wounds. Leo played quietly with a set of rosary beads he found, treating them like action figures. Alara sat on the floor, dyeing her hair. She used a bottle of cheap black dye she bought at the drugstore. She cut it short, hacking away her long brown waves until she looked like a different person. Julian watched her from the bench. "You are mourning your hair," he observed quietly. "It grows back," Alara said, wiping dye from her forehead. "Heads don't." "You look fierce," he said. "Like a warrior monk." "I look like a boy named Dave who mops floors," Alara corrected. "That's the point." She finished and moved to sit beside him. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows through the stained glass. "Julian," she said, "if this goes wrong." "It will not." "If it does," she insisted, "you take Leo and you fly. You don't look back for me." Julian grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Do not insult me, Alara. I do not leave my heart behind." The confession hung in the air, heavy and sweet. "My heart." He hadn't meant the organ pumping in his chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Then we win." "Yes," Julian said, his thumb brushing her lip. "We win." The plaza was a sea of monsters. Thousands of vampires had gathered for the equinox address. Giant screens broadcast Serafina's face as she stood on the central podium, looking regal and solemn. "The king is fading," she intoned to the crowd. "Tonight we mourn. But tomorrow we rise. A new era begins. An era of strength. An era where we no longer hide in the shadows." Cheers erupted. It was a hungry sound, violent and eager. At the service entrance, a white van rolled up to the checkpoint. 2 guards, massive brutes with fangs already extended, banged on the window. "Papers," the guard grunted. The driver, an old man with a hat pulled low, Silas, handed over a clipboard. "Delivery for the High Council. Blood wine and pastries." The guard sniffed the air. He frowned. I smell human. We have 2 human loaders in the back, Silas said boredly. Union rules. They do the heavy lifting. The guard walked to the back of the van. He ripped the doors open. Inside, 2 figures in gray jumpsuits sat on crates. One was slight, with choppy black hair, Alara. The other was tall, wearing a cap, head bowed, looking at his boots, Julian. The guard peered in. His red eyes scanned them. Julian didn't move. He was suppressing his aura, clamping down on his power so tight it must have been agony. Clean, the guard muttered. Go. He slammed the doors. The van rolled forward, entering the belly of the beast. We're in, Alara whispered into her headset. Phase 1 complete, Silas confirmed. Parked at the loading dock beneath the stage. Leo? Julian asked, his voice a low rumble from beneath the cap. Hidden in the bread crate, Leo's muffled voice came from a large, ventilation-hold box next to Alara. It smells like yeast. Stay quiet, little bat, Alara said. The van stopped. They were directly under the main stage. They could hear the thumping of boots overhead as Serafina paced. And now, Serafina's voice boomed through the speakers, shaking the van walls. I asked the council to step forward and ratify the regency. Bring the crown. That is our cue, Julian said. He stood up. He stripped off the janitor's jumpsuit. Underneath, he wore the ruined tuxedo, but he had pinned the Order of the Dragon, a massive gold medallion, to his chest. He looked at Alara. Are you ready to scream? He asked. I was born screaming, Alara said, grabbing the microphone they had stolen from the church's sound system, which Silas had rigged to override the plaza's frequency. Julian kicked the back doors open. They didn't sneak. They didn't hide. Julian Vane, High Executioner, and Alara Vance, the waitress from Sal's Diner, marched up the service ramp and onto the stage, right behind Serafina. Serafina was raising the crown to the crowd. The roar was deafening. Then Julian tapped her on the shoulder. Serafina turned. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened. Julian punched her. It wasn't a slap. It wasn't a gentleman's duel. He drew back his fist and punched the self-proclaimed Queen Regent square in the jaw with the force of a freight train. Serafina flew backward, skidding across the stage, the crown clattering away. The crowd went instantly silent. 10,000 vampires froze. Julian stepped up to the podium. He grabbed the mic. You're early, he snarled to the crowd, his voice magnified to godlike proportions. He reached down and pulled Alara to his side. And you, he pointed to the cameras, have been lied to. Serafina scrambled backward, her heels scraping against the stage floor, a trail of dark blood marring her pristine white chin. The silence that held the plaza was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a tornado touches down. 10,000 pairs of predatory eyes shifted from the fallen regent to the man standing over her, his chest heaving, his velvet jacket torn, looking less like a politician and more like the god of vengeance he was rumored to be. Treason, Serafina hissed, spitting a tooth onto the stage. She pointed a shaking finger at the royal guards stationed at the perimeter. Kill them. Kill the usurper. The guards hesitated. They looked at Julian, the High Executioner, the man who had trained half of them. They looked at the Order of the Dragon gleaming on his chest. Hold! Julian's voice boomed through the stolen microphone, the sound echoing off the obsidian skyscrapers. The first blade drawn is the first neck broken. Look at your queen. Look at her fear. Does that look like the face of innocence? He killed the king. Serafina shrieked, scrambling to her feet, her beautiful face contorted into a mask of rage. He poisoned him to steal the throne. Lies, Alara said. Her voice wasn't amplified like Julian's, but she stepped up to the mic, her hand trembling only slightly. She looked out at the sea of monsters, creatures that could snap her like a twig, and found she wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. We didn't bring poison. We brought the truth. She nodded to Silas, who was standing by the bread crate. Silas kicked the latch. The front of the crate fell open. Leo stepped out. He was small, rumpled, and covered in breadcrumbs, but he walked to the front of the stage with his head high, just as Julian had taught him. He stood next to Alara, grabbing her hand for strength, and looked at the cameras. A gasp rippled through the crowd, starting low and building into a roar. The air. The boy is alive. Aunt Seraphina told the bad men to take me, Leo said. His child's voice was clear, cutting through the noise like a bell. She said I was in the way. She said Uncle Julian would be blamed. He is mind-controlled. Seraphina screamed, her eyes glowing a radioactive green. The human witch has ensorcelled him. Enough, Julian said. He stepped between Alara and Seraphina. The game is over, Seraphina. The council knows. The king's physician has already confessed to the antidote you withheld. Surrender, and I will grant you a quick death. Fight, and I will make it last a century. Seraphina looked at the crowd. She saw the shift. The guards were lowering their weapons. The council members in the front row were standing up, turning their backs on her. Her power, built on shadows and whispers, was evaporating under the harsh stage lights. She snarled, a sound that tore at the throat. If I burn, I take the House of Vane with me. She didn't lunge at Julian. She knew she couldn't beat the executioner in a duel. She lunged at the weakest link. She threw herself at Alara. Seraphina moved faster than thought, a blur of white silk and claws. Julian roared, reaching out, but he was a fraction of a second too far away. Alara saw the death coming. She saw the elongated fangs, the hate in the green eyes. Time seemed to slow down, stretching like taffy. She remembered the training yard. Freeze. Strike. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Alara reached into the pocket of her janitorial jumpsuit and pulled out the spray bottle she had filled at the hardware store. A mixture of industrial bleach and ammonia, a chemical weapon that burned eyes and choked lungs, regardless of species. She squeezed the trigger, spraying a mist directly into Seraphina's face. Seraphina screamed, clawing at her eyes, blinded for the critical heartbeat Alara needed. Alara dropped to the floor, rolling sideways. Now, Julian, she shouted. Julian didn't hesitate. He moved like liquid smoke. He caught Seraphina by the throat, lifting her off the ground, his momentum carrying them both across the stage. He slammed her against the podium, the wood splintering under the impact. You touched her, Julian whispered, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that the microphone picked up and broadcast to the entire city. You dared to touch her. Seraphina clawed at his arm, but her strength was nothing compared to his rage. I yield, she choked out. I claim sanctuary. Sanctuary is for the righteous, Julian said, his eyes burning with amber fire. You are merely expired. He threw her. She flew off the stage, landing in the center of the crowd. The royal guard surrounded her instantly, spears pointed at her throat. Julian stood at the edge of the stage, his chest heaving. He looked down at the defeated usurper, then up at the thousands of faces watching him. He reached back. Alara stepped forward, taking his hand. He pulled her to his side, intertwining his fingers with hers. He pulled Leo to his other side. The peace stands, Julian declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The king lives. And let it be known, anyone who hunts a human in my city answers to me. The crowd went silent. Then, slowly, the guards bowed. Then the council. Then, wave after wave, the citizens of the Undercity dropped to one knee. They weren't bowing to a tyrant. They were bowing to the man who had the power to destroy them all, but chose instead to hold the hand of a waitress. The adrenaline crash was worse than the fear. 3 hours later, the citadel was secure. The king, weak but conscious, had been moved to a secure medical wing. Seraphina was in a cell that not even light could escape. Alara sat on a velvet sofa in Julian's private chambers in the Crystal Tower. She was still wearing the gray jumpsuit, smelling of bleach and sweat. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't hold the cup of tea Silas had placed in front of her. The door opened. Julian walked in. He had showered and changed into a fresh shirt, though he hadn't buttoned it. His hair was damp, and the exhaustion was etched deep into his face, making him look his age for the first time. He stopped in front of her. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her as if he were trying to memorize her molecular structure. Is it over? Alara whispered. The fighting is over, Julian said, sitting on the heavy coffee table in front of her so they were eye level. The politics are just beginning. My brother is awake. He is, displeased with his wife. And Leo? Sleeping in a bed made of goose down, guarded by 12 of my best men. He asked for you before he drifted off. Alara nodded, looking down at her hands. So, I guess this is it. You have your family back. The coup is crushed. I should probably go. Go. Julian repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. Back to the diner, Alara said, forcing a smile that felt like cracked glass. Sal is probably wondering why I missed 2 shifts. And my rent is due on Tuesday. Julian reached out and took her hands. His skin was cool, soothing against her feverish nerves. Alara, he said softly, there is no going back. You blinded a high council member with cleaning supplies on live television. You are the most famous human in the supernatural world. If you return to that apartment, you will have paparazzi in your fire escape and warlocks trying to buy your autograph. So what? Alara pulled her hands away, defensive because she was terrified of what she wanted. I just stay here? As what? Your pet human? The mascot of House Vane. No, Julian said firmly. Not a pet. Never a pet. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, the human world above, the vampire world below. I've spent centuries alone, Alara. I told myself it was necessary. That emotional attachment was a weakness a man in my position could not afford. I thought I was protecting myself. He turned back to her. The amber eyes were vulnerable, stripped of all their shields. But when I saw you on that stage, when I saw you stand your ground against a monster to save my nephew, I realized that I haven't been protecting myself. I've just been slowly dying of cold. He walked back to her, extending his hand again. Do not go back to the diner. Stay. Not as a guest. Stay as my partner. Help me rebuild the council. Help me bridge the gap between our worlds. You see things I miss. You have a heart that this city desperately needs. You want me to be a consultant? Alara asked, breathless. I want you to be with me, Julian corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper. I want to wake up and know that you are down the hall. I want to argue with you about safety protocols. I want to watch you grow old, Alara, and I want to cherish every single second of it. Alara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the monster, yes. But she also saw the man who had held a terrified boy in a rain-slicked alley. She saw the man who had defied a kingdom for her. She stood up. She took his hand. I have conditions, she said. Julian smiled, the expression reaching his eyes. Name them. 1. No more freezing me with your vampire mojo. Agreed. 2. Leo goes to a real school. No more being locked in a tower. Negotiable. But agreed in principle. And 3. Alara stepped closer, resting her head against his chest, hearing the slow, powerful thrum of his heart. You have to teach me how to use a sword. I'm done with spray bottles. Julian wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into the fortress of his body. He kissed the top of her head. Done, he whispered. Welcome home, Alara. The bell above the door of the Night Owl chimed. It wasn't a diner anymore. It was a community center, a neutral ground located exactly on the border between the human financial district and the entrance to the Undercity. The sign out front read, All species welcome. No biting. Alara wiped down the counter. She wasn't wearing a grease-stained apron. She wore a tailored black blazer over jeans, and at her hip, concealed but accessible, was a silver dagger. The place was bustling. At one table, a group of human college students were studying. At the next, 2 werewolves were arguing over a chessboard. In the corner, a vampire elder was sipping synthetic blood from a coffee mug, reading the Financial Times. Order for table 4, a voice called from the kitchen. Leo pushed through the swinging doors, balancing a tray of sandwiches. He looked healthier now, his cheeks flushed with color. He wore a baseball cap and sneakers. He looked like a normal kid, mostly, except for the way he moved, too graceful, too quiet. I got it, Alara said, taking the tray. How's the homework coming? Calculus is harder than ancient runic history, Leo complained. Uncle Julian says I can't summon a demon to do the test for me. He's right, Alara laughed. Go take a break. Silas is bringing the car around in 10. Leo grinned, flashing a hint of fong, and darted off to watch the werewolves play chess. The door chimed again. The chatter in the room dipped, just for a second. Instinct. Julian walked in. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp and terrifyingly expensive, but he had abandoned the tie. He looked tired. The council meetings were endless these days, but the perpetual winter that used to hang around him had thawed. He walked straight to the counter. Table for one? Alara teased. We're pretty booked. You might have to wait. I have connections with the management, Julian said, leaning his elbows on the counter. He looked around the room. It is busy. It's safe, Alara corrected. That's why they come. Humans feel cool, vampires feel normal. It's working, Julian. The bridge is holding. Because of you, he said. He reached across the counter, taking her hand. His thumb brushed the ring she now wore, not a wedding ring, but a signet of House Vane, marking her as the consort of the High Executioner. The king is asking for you. He wants your opinion on the new zoning laws for the docks. Tell him I'm busy, Alara said, grabbing a towel. The espresso machine is broken again. I will tell him you are indispensable, Julian said. Which is the truth. He leaned over the counter and kissed her. It wasn't a hungry, desperate kiss like in the church. It was a kiss of familiarity, of comfort, of a promise kept. Ready to go home? He asked. Almost, Alara said. She looked at Leo laughing with the wolves. She looked at the vampire reading his paper. She looked at the city outside, where the rain was falling, washing the streets clean. She had started as a broke waitress hiding a monster in an alley. Now, she was the guardian of the threshold, the woman who taught the darkness how to love. Yeah, Alara said, untying her apron and tossing it into the hamper. She squeezed Julian's hand, feeling the electricity that always sparked between them. Let's go home. She flipped the sign on the door to closed, but she left the porch light on. In a city of shadows, it was important to leave a light burning for the strays.